Welcome back, Honors. Welcome back, Candid Catholic. Welcome back, everybody. This is our first, one of our last flips together. This one is a joint flip, so if you have friends that are in CP, friends that are in Honors, we're going to use this one at the same time to discuss the actual warfare of World War I. All right, so we'll try to not keep it too long. I got my timer on, okay, so I can know exactly how long I've taken. But let's go ahead and get into it. So we left off in class talking about World War I and the fact that Germany and the Central Powers were at an automatic default, right? They were at an automatic default due to the fact that they were going to be busy fighting a two-front war, due to the fact that they were in the middle of the map of Europe and were surrounded on both sides by enemy. So you had the Russians on their eastern borders, and then you had the French and the British on their western borders. So what the Germans are going to come up with early on is called the Schlieffen Plan, named after Arthur Schlieffen, a general from the early 1900s in Germany. His plan was to send 90% of their forces sweeping through Belgium and then down into France and crush France quickly to take them out of the war so they could then force all of their force on Russia. The problem is it's going to fail. The reason why it fails is because Arthur Schlieffen died before World War I ever actually commenced. And the people who successed him, who followed up after him, they actually are only going to send, instead of 90%, they sent like 75%. So the force wasn't as strong. They're going to be stalled out at the Battle of the Marne, which is where the very first trenches were going to be dug leading to World War I. And then there were two fronts in this war resulting from the failed Schlieffen Plan. There was the Western Front, which was in France, and then there was the Eastern Front, which started in Germany and got pushed all the way back into Russia. So you had the Western Front right here, and you had the Eastern Front over here. And a better map of the two of them is right here. So the Western Front, as a solid reminder, was almost 470 miles of straight trench, all right? Crazy amounts of trench, insanely long, okay? So, but let's keep getting after it. Now, a lot of this trench warfare is going to result in what's called a stalemate, okay, which is a deadlock in which neither side is actually able to advance or defeat one another. Trench warfare is very deadly because neither side is really moving or shifting. They're just stuck there, firing at each other, gaining only inches at a time, okay? So, now we talked a little bit about what the trenches themselves actually looked like, right? We talked about how this is an actual good trench diagram, and how you can see from the split level right here, there was trench bore where you could step up, bolt holes right here, and actually sandbag walls. The enemy front line is this way. Out here is no man's land. Here's an even better one. This is an aerial view. Again, as you can tell, the trench networks are very intricate, and they look almost more like a zigzag level instead of actually just like a very basic straight line. And they also had multiple levels. You had support trenches, communication trenches, artillery batteries in the back. You had your barbed wire, entanglement, defense lines, wire obstacles, and then you had to leave enough space for people to actually get through. Now, this also is another aerial view of what the trenches looked like. Now, notice really quickly that in no man's land, or the trenches are essentially two lines facing against each other, but there's a heavy amount of machine gun fire there. But also notice one really big fact, that this is an actual aerial view of the front of World War I taken from a hot air balloon. And as you can tell, they're not straight lines. They curve, they cut. There's certain areas that are very close together, and whereas there are certain areas that are very spread apart. It wasn't a perfect system. It's not like, hey guys, over there, y'all dig your trench, I'll dig my trench. They dug them advancing forwards and backwards the best they could. And so trench warfare was a very deadly thing. Now, so how do you attack that? How do you try to gain the upper hand in a trench warfare scenario? Well, there was a stalemate on the Western Front in France, so territory was gained and lost at about yards at a time. Very small increments. And the human cost during these battles is going to be absolutely catastrophic. And the order over the top actually came up. That means you were going to charge over no man's land into the other trench and into enemy lines, into heavy amounts of fire. So during this, how do you attack? Well, what do? You attack very aggressively. You have heavy offenses. And then to break the stalemates, both sides are going to begin to attack very aggressively. They're also going to begin to develop new weapons, right? So The big battles that are going to occur from these are some like the Battle of the Somme, which over 1 million are going to be killed or wounded. It's the very first time tanks were ever used. Verdun in France, 500,000 are going to be killed and missing. It's where some of the earliest trenches were dug. And the Second Battle of Ypres, 10,000 were going to die from just poisonous gas, right? So the stalemates ended up costing a lot of human lives, a ton of human lives. Now right here, that is a man actually standing out in no man's land. To give you an idea of what no man's land actually looked like. It is treacherous, dangerous, full of water and dead trees and other types of terrible, terrible, awful landscapes. Here's some of the tunnels that they would actually use to try and go underneath it. No man's land was a very scary place to be. Neither side, though, in the Battle of the Somme, Battle of Verdun, Battle of the Frontiers, Battle of First Ypres, Second Ypres, all of these guys, none of them are going to win advantages. They're just going to still be deadlocked. So write this down really quickly. It's very important. You need to highlight it, circle it, star it, whatever you got to do. This turned into a war of attrition. Attrition. Now, a war of attrition is when you are basically fighting the other side, waiting for someone to run out of supplies and give up first, okay? So you're basically just trying to hold off and not be the one who loses and basically starves to death, right? So it became a war of attrition, all right? Now, new technologies are also going to make this war very, very deadly. All of the following things, while you write some down, I'll tell you some of the facts about them. Now, all of these new technologies are going to be used for warfare that had never been seen before. You've got machine guns, right? That could fire upwards of 200 to 300 rounds per minute, okay? They oftentimes would jam. They had water barrels on the end of them, so they actually could not, like the barrels wouldn't warp as they were cooling. They had a lot of different intricacies and a lot of different ideas behind them. Then you had artillery shells. Artillery shells are these large, large guns that are actually angled upwards, and you're basically just lobbing explosive shells, okay? So let me show you really quick. Artillery, World War I. Here we go. So this is what an artillery shell looks like. And I say this just because, oh, and by the way, this one's a really funny one. That is Big Bertha, invented by a guy named Dick Bertha and named after his wife. Artillery shells look like this one could fire over a mile. And artillery shells look like this. They're basically industrial cannons, all right? Industrial cannons. And they just launch huge like shells that look like this, almost like humongous bullets, a very far distance, and they claimed more lives than any other weapon in World War I. But that's what an artillery shell looks like. And excuse me, it wasn't invented by a guy named Dick Bertha. Dick Bertha in German means Big Bertha. Now, so apparently the guy that did invent it, though, named it after his wife, which is hilarious. So now grenades are going to also be developed. Now grenades have been around since like early Rome, but they're going to become much more portable and a lot more deadly in a sense. Americans were very well known for throwing one from one trench to another. Poison gas, mustard gas being the most popular, and gas masks are going to be created. We talked about the other 3 types of poison gas as well. Trench warfare being a technology in and of itself. Tanks, the very first tanks were actually going to be used. The very first tank ever actually created was called Little Willie, and it was developed by the British and used at the Battle of the Somme, and it could only travel about 5 miles an hour. It went very slow, kind of like a brisk jog by a person, and it had no guns on it. But then as time went forward, people began to create their own tanks, and each tank was then known by a gender. Male tanks had heavy cannons on them. Female tanks only had small machine guns on them. Airplanes are going to develop as well, and they're going to begin to be created. But airplanes in World War I actually looked more like this, or I'll show you in a second. They are a biplane. They had 2 wings on them. Now, dogfighting was actually some of the earliest bombing runs by airplanes are going to be basically just got the pilots pulling up a small bomb out of the cockpit, turning, and then just dropping it like that. Oh, this is another really scary thing. Check these out. These were also used by planes as well. They're called I can't remember how to pronounce it. Pfeile. It's a German device. They were small, piercing darts that they would actually drop from airplanes in World War I directly on top of enemies below. Some of them were even explosive, so if it hit you in the head, it was like a small grenade that just hit you in the head. So a lot of this is going to result in things like dogfights as well, when airplanes would actually battle each other. And they were called dogfights because planes used to sweep up into the sky to try and get somebody off their tail, and they would stall out. And when they stall out, they would begin to fall down so they could try to reverse position. When they would kick the engine back on, it would make a backfire noise. and the troops on the ground said it sounded like a dog barking, hence dogfighting. So, another big development is going to be submarines, of course, Unterseeboot, we talked about that already. Zeppelins, which was very, very large, powerful, it did huge bombing runs from almost a mile in the air. And then messenger dogs is another thing. Bomb dogs was a big problem as well. So that's a Zeppelin right there. That's Big Bertha again, artillery shell. Here's some of the planes making bombing runs. As you can tell, that, of course, again, is a biplane right there. The most famous aircraft aviator during World War I was a man by the name of Baron von Richthofen, known as the Red Baron, who actually flew an all-red plane with 3 wings on it and had over 80 confirmed kills. Absolutely insane. Now, Russia, though, is going to actually end up dropping out of this war on the early onset because they were very, very poorly equipped. They could barely fight. And in a modern war, some soldiers that they had in Russia didn't even have rifles because they hadn't industrialized yet. The Eastern Front was absolutely dominated by the Germans. One crazy fact about the Eastern Front, they couldn't use gas there because it was too cold. So the gas liquid actually freeze up inside of the gas grenades. So the Eastern Front was dominated by the Germans. It was pushed all the way back because the poorly equipped Russians just could not handle it. Write this down really quick. By 1915, after 1914, so by 1915, 2 million Russian soldiers had already died due to their poor equipment. Now, also they were deserting all the time and running back home and trying to rebel against the czars and actually take some land back. And then, not to mention the fact that Balkan states like Bulgaria are going to join the Central Powers to defeat Serbia. The Ottomans, write this down as well. The Ottomans are going to, do I have this over? Yeah, all right. So, this guy, very important. In 1917, the Russians drop out completely because they have a communist revolution in Russia, led by this guy, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. All right, he's the leader of the Bolshevik Party against them, or sort of with the Mensheviks at first, but he took Russia to communism, created what you know as the Soviet Union, right? So, well, he tried to take them to communism. He got stalled out to socialism. These guys underneath him, Trotsky and Stalin, are going to begin battling for each other for control, but as you can tell, Russia is going to drop out. We'll talk about that a little bit more tomorrow when we get into the ending of the war. The Ottomans are going to join the Central Powers in October of 1914. War is even going to erupt in Africa. The colonies battled one another after the imperialization process had been done. They drew lines by who they were owned by following the Berlin Conference. Australia and New Zealand are even going to send troops to aid Britain. However, America still remained uninvolved while this war was commencing in Europe. Okay, so that is, I think that's it. Yep. We'll talk about some of the casualties, rationing, total warfare, some things like that tomorrow. We will not, we'll have a very short warm-up tomorrow, but not a terribly long one. But yeah, that's it. So that's kind of how World War I was fought, the weapons that were developed to fight that war, stalemates. We talked about trench warfare a lot in class today. The Schlieffen Plan, how the two-front war is going to result. There you go, right? So we will talk some more in class tomorrow. Look forward to seeing y'all then. This bad boy wasn't too long. It was only about 12 minutes and 41 seconds so far, but won't take up too much more of your time. Hope you all have a great evening. Start on your study guide now. See you guys tomorrow.